Welcome to my channel. Today I'm taking you into my real portfolio. No theory, no model portfolios, but my actual numbers. Over 62,000 euros invested, over 300 individual stocks, and over 3,000 euros in dividends so far. I'll show you my real winners and also my real losers, and what I look for when making a selection. If you're interested in long-term cash flow and honest market growth, then please definitely stay tuned. So let's just start with the portfolio value. The portfolio value is currently at 62,000 euros. I've invested 62,668 euros. That means I currently have a price loss of 1,800 euros and an ICF of 2.35%. I've received 3,000 euros in dividends so far and a realized loss of 680 at 48 euros. I'll tell you in a moment why this came about. Otherwise, you can see it here, 302 stocks in total split between two portfolios. Namely, the portfolio is divided into Trade Republic and one at Scalable Capital Bank, which is Bader Bank. Why is that? Back then, Trade Republic simply offered good interest on cash, and I took advantage of that. Due to the interest rate cut, there was less and less interest, and I reallocated the money into long-term and also short-term bonds to simply get the best possible result out of it. Currently, I'm well below the benchmarks, so as I said, I'm not mincing words, I'm showing you my honest data. Exactly, and that's how it looks right now. It's also partly because I've only been slowly getting into the topic since 2023 and am gradually investing significantly. In 2024 to 2025, I'd say I've now invested my highest amounts. And I'll show you that in a moment too. Exactly, I had already, as I said, just described that, then price gain and realized price loss as well. The dividends in general are at 3,500 euros that I've received so far. The interest, at 100 euros, and in total there's a sum of 1,966 euros 68. Then the taxes to be deducted and my fees. Why are the fees so high? Well, I have 300 individual stocks in general. I've always invested in tranches, roughly, let's say, I always want to invest 100 euros plus upwards so that I have a real fee of about 1%. But I had to build up my portfolio first, and that's why I currently have these simply these high fees, which is perfectly fine because at some point you have to start investing. Higher fees. In return, I'd say I currently have a very good portfolio, which is actually quite extensive and covers a lot well, especially in the hard asset sector. Exactly as promised, my top movers, that's Xpeng, for example. Xpeng isn't a dividend stock, but rather a growth stock. I have it in there too, of course, but rather in a very small amount. That's a speculation, you could almost say. Then Fresnillo, that's a gold mine. Utility operators, here up 102%. Well, with 60 euros, these are small values. They currently pay 2.4%. Due to my favorable entry point, I have a yield on cost of 4%, which is of course already very good for a very defensive player. Those are the values. Banco Santander, those were actually my first purchases with Banco Santander. That's roughly where I started, and it must have been about 2 to 3 years since I've been holding them. They are up 94%, and they actually pay dividends too, but as you can see, it's a very, very small value. Then Philip Morris and Sino Biopharma, but those are also more like speculations. So, for example, Sino Biopharma also pays dividends, I think, but not anything noteworthy. So now let's just move on to my general overview. I have Flex LNG here with 2,100 euros, which was my entry point. I'm also significantly down in price, definitely, yeah, but currently I'm just holding and waiting it out and simply buying more at a low price. I've set a rough value for myself here. I actually want to buy more at under 20 euros. Exactly, I entered at 27 euros back then, and after that the stock just kept falling. But that's fine with me because the stock still pays 13% and it has consistently paid over 10% in dividends since I've held it. And I've gradually increased my position over time. This is now one of my largest, or the largest position based on the entry price. Yeah, it wasn't really planned that way, but that's just how it is. Let's put it this way, it's not a bad thing because the stock is fundamentally strong and it will continue to bring me good dividends. I've already received 145 euros. It's also in the shipping sector. Then Dorian LPG, which I've also already reported on in a short. The entry price was 1,123 euros. I'm now up 60 euros, and I've also already received 290 euros in dividends. Then Thungela, Thungela is a stock for me where I'd say it's very exciting, simply for the reason that it's a coal play. In my view, coal will remain definitely relevant for the next few years because many emerging markets like Taiwan or China and also Vietnam, they still rely essentially on coal. They definitely still need it for their growth. It's basically indispensable. And Thungela has also made good profits recently, even when the price of coal was so low. And now just imagine what happens if the price of coal simply rises by another 10 to 15%, which could happen given the current situation with Iran and Israel, because it's just a fact that there will be more demand as people flock to safety again. For me, it's also just a big turnaround player. I'll just open it here. So, that's what it looks like currently. Now let's just go into the overview. And you can see that Thungela has simply been heavily penalized, and we're coming from 20 euros here. Even back then, good special dividends were paid here. It's really quite impressive what can happen here sometimes. If you just consider it, the price of coal might rise and we'll have a dividend yield of 30% again. Since I entered at such a low price, it could be really good in the long run. Have a positive impact. Currently we're at 14.71%, which in my opinion is definitely very attractive. Of course, with an awareness of the risk naturally, because it's simply South Africa. But in my view, it's simply that the opportunity here is higher for me than, let's say, the risk, in my opinion. How I usually analyze all of this is, of course, through TradingView. That's what we want. Exactly as you can see, I sometimes just draw a few things in, like where values were approximately, where the price might have turned around, and what the important points are in the market, and I actually quite like working with fib retracement. There you can see how the price just plummeted from the top straight down, and we're talking about 78% that the market has simply given up, or the stock. And from a long-term perspective, at least in my view, I see good potential here too, again. Anyway, I don't invest in growth stocks, but rather in dividends. And in my opinion, that's interesting, but it's also interesting here because people simply say coal is dead. And currently, in my view, the market is simply heavily undervalued. Then we have the TORM stock here, which is also a shipping company. Here I have a 15 euro price, plus in 60 euros. I'd say I'll just go through them all. And if there are any questions, you can write to me in the comments. I'm happy to answer why or for what reason I hold something. With Golden Ocean, I have to say, in hindsight, things have gone a bit more difficultly simply for that reason. Golden Ocean was, or is in my opinion, a very interesting dividend payer. Currently, they've more or less suspended the dividend. What they pay now is a very small amount simply for that reason. Euronav, or rather now CMB Tech, wants to completely take over Golden Ocean. Golden Ocean will then belong to CMB Tech, and Golden Ocean is currently being completely phased out in relation to CMB Tech. Unfortunately, because it was also one of my largest positions here, Euronav was then also suspended because Euronav will take over Golden Ocean. And as a result, Euronav or CMB Tech will become a major shipping company because they'll simply cover a lot of this segment, and that'll be something. Let's see what the future brings. I'm relatively optimistic about it, and I hope that somehow a conservative or a good dividend will be paid again. In the future, according to CMB Tech, dividend payments should resume starting in October. Let's just wait and see. I'm definitely curious about it. Then what else is exciting in my portfolio? Well, BWLPG is very interesting in my view because the dividend is already very good. As you can see, I had an entry of 875 euros and 4 cents, but a value of 1,226 euros. That means I have a price gain of 40%. Why is that? Well, you could also say that I obviously bought well and simply at the low point. I definitely buy more at the low point, specifically in the price range between 8 and 9 euros. That is definitely a clear buy for me. But why was I able to push the price down so much? It's because I had Avance Gas in my portfolio, and Avance Gas had a spin-off because they were practically, or rather they merged with BWLPG. That means Avance Gas was simply delisted from the stock exchange this year in May. And in exchange for that, I received BWLPG shares, and yes, even a cash settlement. So that paid off well for me personally. You should normally be able to see that quite clearly. Then we can go into scalable capital here. Here you can see the spin-off that happened where I got the BWLPG shares for the Avance Gas shares. 15 were booked here and 17 at Trade Republic. So I received a total of 32 BWLPG shares for free. The market value at the time they were booked was simply 10 euros. That's why it is the way it currently is. So let's go through it again like this. I'll just look through it again. what I should perhaps go into in more detail or what might still be exciting. You already know Enagas from my shorts, so I also find it a very exciting title, also defensive. Pipeline is always very good in my opinion anyway. I'm also in the red with Kraft Heinz, but for me in the long term it's definitely very interesting because it's just a bit more defensive. Cardinal Energy, yes, or Zim Integrated Shipping, with a €30 dividend that I've received now. And my investment was actually only about €120. I increased my position there, practically as you can see here. So I had bought for €150 here and have already received €19 in dividends. I bought more there. Now on June 9th, I just received another dividend of €10.65. Yeah, I mean, I'll just scroll down real quick. You're welcome to take a look at this in peace. I had also already informed you about Helmerich and Payne. I'm up 7% there now. It was, yeah, I would say already relatively at the low point when I bought more. In general, of course, it can be said that I invest a lot in energy and also in shipping. But I can also show you this ratio again in a moment. Parquet actually shows that quite well. Total Gabon, also a very interesting yield. Yes, so as I said, I have some titles that are also very unknown, like Tiger Brands, Ashanti. I don't know if anyone knows that. It's a smaller mining factor, but also in the gold mining sector. Tiger Brands is in South Africa, a very well-known food brand. Alibaba doesn't pay a dividend either, just like Xpeng, but it's just a good growth stock that I wanted to have in there. But only a small position because I primarily focus on cash flow. And I'll wait until the price maybe doubles or so, or maybe even triples. And then I'll definitely sell and reallocate. Exactly, and that's what it looks like for me personally. I think you should already be familiar with, or at least have heard of, some of these particular stocks that I'm mentioning here. I also have Unilever Indonesia, for example, which I didn't even know that there was a separate division for Indonesia, but I took it anyway. Because in my opinion, it's possible they'll start paying dividends. Now we're almost at the end. Freenet was also one of my first positions. Here are a few more speculations in the area of Bitcoin miners. I received a spin-off here, which is why I'm completely in the black there. Anglo-American, then Walt Disney. I got that as a gift from Trade Republic when I signed up. Exactly, and that's actually it. I have one more position. I don't think it was transferred. And that's a bit of a hedge because as the saying goes, the saying is sell in May and go away. And so I opened a position in May, a short practically for falling prices on the S&P, but again only a small amount just to hedge a bit. Exactly, here's the breakdown. So we see I have a total of what feels like 40% or over 35% invested in energy in industrial companies with 14.57. But in my opinion, they're all related to energy somehow. So Flex LNG, BW LPG, Golden Ocean at least, and also Frontline because they actually deliver or ship oil and gas. And if that flourishes, let's say if oil and gas rise, then the order rates are also higher because potentially more is paid. Exactly. I also have many parcel service providers like PostNL, Austrian Post, Deutsche Post, UPS. I also mentioned that because it's just very cheap in my opinion right now. Then basic materials you can, yeah, just take a look through. Communication services as well, definitely. So then let's look at the sectors here again. Then the region. You can see I invest a lot in North America, Europe. Asia has actually become quite a significant part for me by now. South America, Africa. You just notice, or rather I'd like to start with the BRICS or others as well. So in my view, places like India or China and Brazil, these are all countries that, in my opinion, will definitely see very strong growth in the future. Why? India simply has a very large population that is also very tech savvy, especially with computer services and so on. And especially with the rise of programming or even AI, they are already very strong there in terms of population numbers. And you also just have to see China and other emerging markets, meaning other developing countries, have simply been at a low point recently. And you can just look at that if you pull up an emerging markets chart or an ETF, and then we have a comparison. It feels like it's at its lowest point right now. And that's why I'm shifting a bit more in that direction, because I want to profit from it in the long run. Now I'll move on to the dividends. As I said, you can't really use this as a factor yet because I primarily started investing my money in 2024. Before that, it was very small amounts and such. Otherwise, we already have here. Sure, strong growth in the dividend itself. And from 2024 to 2025, we already have a 44% increase, which is very good in my opinion. Taxes are 505 euros in total out of 3,500 euros. The current dividend yield is 4.24% at the moment, but my yield on cost is just much higher. I can show you that in a bit, it's no problem at all. But because I have to invest here first, it is of course relatively lower, the dividend, the personal dividend yield that is reflected here. So is there anything else to say about this? Now we come to my dividend calendar. In 2024, my dividend was 1,297 euros for the year. Now in 2025, I have a dividend of 5,445 euros and 7 cents. But you also have to consider that first, there are still 7 months where I'll execute my monthly savings plan to invest. And the dividends I receive, I reinvest them 100%. But let's take a look at what I've already received this year. And when, how much, and how it's all going. So let's just get started. With January, in January it was 86 euros and 4 cents. I think I won't go through exactly what. In January it's 86 euros and 4 cents in dividends that I received. I'll just go through my list now when the amount is significantly higher so you can see who pays actively to give you an insight or impression. In February it's 360 euros. You see many telecommunications providers or also tobacco companies. In March it was 290. April is 380. In May it was 519 euros. That is actually one of my best months. Let's scroll down here and just take a look at what's going on. Exactly, so Evans Gas was still included. I got some really good dividends from them until they were subsequently delisted from the stock exchange. Good, then let's move on to June. There it's 475.77, then 386, 329, 800, 50.60 in September. Well, of course it must be said that it's all just a forecast. So a lot of it hasn't been officially confirmed yet. But here too, it's just so you can get an impression. Torm with 178 euros, that's quite a statement for sure. Especially relative to the amount invested, which you saw earlier. Yeah, but you can pay a little attention to the value here. So I have many stocks that definitely pay over 8%. Sure, some small ones with 2% or so. But primarily it's, I'd say 8 plus for sure. We can calculate the overall value later on. So then we have October with 280, November with 320, and December with 1,100 euros. That's a nice Christmas present, of course. Exactly, that's how it is then. And now we can also see what's being suggested for 2026. Theoretically, we'd be at 6,500 euros. Now, let's just take the value that I would currently receive. That would be 5,445.07 divided by... So, we're calculating our yield on cost or my overall return, and then just divide by the invested sum, I'd suggest. It makes the most sense because we want to know what the capital yields overall. And then times 100. That means I have an effective yield on cost, or rather, my current dividend is around 8.7%, which is quite good in my opinion. Normally an S&P does about 7% a year, though obviously this year or the last 2 years, significantly more, but these 7% also include these crashes, for example, or corrections. I'll just call them that for now, exactly, and that's what the whole thing looks like. And through price increases or dividend hikes, I can of course significantly increase my YOC per share, which really makes a difference in the long run. So if let's just assume for a moment, I wouldn't invest anymore and I would actually receive the 6,500 euros in the year 2026. That's so hard to calculate, I'm aware of that, because maybe my portfolio will also grow, more or less, but let's just assume for now. I'll stick with the invested value. Then in 2026, I'd already have a YOC of 10.39%, which in my view is very strong, definitely. And now I'll calculate what I would get per month. Currently, it's about 450 euros, which I receive monthly in dividends. So I think that was a very good and broad and comprehensive overview of my portfolio in general. If you have any questions, just let me know. And we'll see each other soon in the next video or also in the next short. I'm looking forward to it.